In today's episode, we're digging into one of the biggest make or break moments in any solar project: site selection and feasibility. It's the stage where projects either get the green light or never get off the ground. To walk us through the real-world challenges and opportunities, I'm joined by Benoy Thanjan, founder and CEO of Reneu Energy. Benoy has seen it all from financing, permitting, interconnection to land acquisition, and he even has advised solar startups, giving him a uniquely complete picture of how projects succeed or fail. Benoy, I'm so glad to have you on the show. Welcome. Can you tell us about your professional journey and how you got started in the renewable energy sector?
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate Anna, you having me on the podcast and being one of the first interviews. So I've been now in the renewable energy sector. I can't believe it. It's been more than 20 years. Time flies by when you're having fun. It's amazing to see the growth of the industry. I first got into energy actually out of grad school. I worked at Deloitte and Touche in their energy financial advisory services practice. And then I wanted to be on the buy side or the investment side instead of the consulting side. So I worked for a private equity fund called Ridgewood Renewable Power, and I analyzed investments in renewable energy projects, not solar. And then I can't believe it's now going to be like 17 years ago. I was like, solar is going to be the next big thing. I was telling everyone about it. People are like, you're crazy, you're out of your mind. And I'm like, I have to work for a solar company. So I actually worked for a company called Vanguard Energy Partners, which is a large EPC doing project finance. And then I worked at Tesla in their project finance group. I started their environmental commodities trading desk. Then 13 years ago, I started Reneu Energy. We're a solar developer and consulting firm, mostly focused on developing solar projects in the Northeast and Mid Atlantic of the US, predominantly New York and New Jersey. We're also doing stuff in California and Texas as well. And I've developed over 100 megawatts of solar projects in the US, and things are always constantly changing, and we're learning as we go and adapting and adjusting to new market dynamics, which makes it fun.
I always love hearing how people getting to find their way into clean energy, and it's normally not a straight line, but for you, I think it seems like it was pretty clear. And the one thing I didn't mention during the intro is that Benoy is also the host of the Solar Maverick podcast. So tell us, Benoy, how did you get started and what was the goal of the podcast?
I started the Solar Maverick podcast in 2018. We've released 240 episodes. We come out with content on a weekly basis, and I'm excited to interview Anna on the podcast at RE Plus, which is coming out in a few weeks. So it was interesting. I was actually on a podcast called Create Your Life. We were the host, Kevin Y. Brown, he and I were in an accelerator together at different points. It's called the Startup Leadership Program, which is an entrepreneurship accelerator. That's how I started Reneu Energy at the same time as that accelerator. Anyway, I told him I would be a great guest. I was so confident, and I love podcasts. I listened to a lot of podcasts, and then he said, "Sure, let's have you on the podcast." So I did the interview, and my marketing person was like, "Wow, like this is a great interview. Like, how long did you prepare for it?" And I said, Kevin gave me the questions like a minute beforehand. And then it was like this 45-minute to an hour interview. So it's like, oh, we should look if there's any solar podcasts. So back in 2018, 7 years ago, which is crazy, it's been 7 years, there wasn't many solar podcasts. So it's like, let's like try to do this podcast. And, worst case scenario, like you'll get a lot better at public speaking. So I first started interviewing my friends, and now it's actually one of the most popular podcasts in solar. We've interviewed so many great guests like Jigger Shaw, who was head of the DOE's loan program, Abby Hopper recently, who's the head of the Solar Energy Industry Association. It's about solar and entrepreneurship. So we talk about that and provide suggestions. What else could I tell you? Yeah, so it's been an amazing journey. I've grown and learned a lot. It's amazing too how many people listen to the podcast and how many people have come into the solar industry from listening to the podcast. And also people have said that they've come up with business ideas or even suggestions on the business or even about solar. And like obviously like the Big Beautiful Bill, we put out a lot of content, maybe 8 or 9 episodes specifically about it. So we've been getting a lot of, the other podcasters haven't been doing like this real time sort of like because everything's like changing in the industry. We just actually came out with a safe harboring podcast. The importance of safe harboring is to take advantage of the investment tax credit. And we had someone from a company called Leo Berwick talk about that, which they provided guidance on August 15th, meaning the Department of Treasury. And I know I'm probably getting to too many in many details, but it's great, Anna, that PVK's, starting their own podcast. Obviously, you just started doing the interviews for, hosting the podcast. And, I think there needs to be a lot of education within the industry. It's amazing, like how podcasting can help educate the industry. And I appreciate obviously you taking that initiative and PVK's doing that. And obviously having me on your first few podcasts as well. And it's obviously the Solar Maverick podcast. You could find it on all the major podcasting platforms.
Well, yeah, we invite all of our audiences to go and check out the Solar Maverick. Thanks, Benoy. We're excited about launching our podcast too.
Thanks, and I'm excited for you.
So tell us, why solar? What was it? What was it that out of all of the renewables, solar was the one that you had your mindset on?
Yeah, so I had first experience in fossil fuels at Deloitte. So I had experience with coal, gas, simple cycle, combined cycle, distribution, heating networks, transmission, distribution. And then I transitioned to Ridgewood renewable power, and I did waste to energy, landfill gas, hydro, biomass, which is wood burning. But the great thing about solar, and when I studied it, is solar is a technology, not a fuel. And we have an abundant resource of solar every day. The sun shines, and we're not even actually even capturing. There must be a percentage out there of how much actual solar we're using for renewable energy. So what I liked is, it is a technology, not a fuel. I saw back then that it's going to be the cheapest energy source in the future, and it's very easy to build. And that's, I have experience with developing a waste to energy facility, solar and wind, and solar is definitely a lot easier to build. And with storage becoming economical, the big thing is an intermittent fuel source. That really changes the equation. And also, it's distributed power. So it's, our old energy model was you have a big, plant and then you transmit, it generates the power, then it goes through transmission and distribution to get to the home or the business. But now you could do it localized and on site, which obviously is a lot better and also creates independence as well from the grid, which a lot of companies and residential homes want to be. So that's kind of how it happened. Also, too, I believe with the electricity transition that we're seeing, like there'll be less dependence on gas and fuels. The U.S. has been in a lot of wars due to oil in the Middle East, and so the electrification of the grid is a great way to not be dependent on foreign oil and
Great
energy
points there.
security.
I'd love to hear how you decided, or the moment when you decided to go from working within the industry to actually starting your own company. What led you to the creation of Renew?
Yeah, so I mean, I always wanted to start my own company. Both my parents actually had their own businesses. So from the age of 12, I worked at both of my parents' business. My mom was a pediatrician. She had her own practice in the Bronx, New York. Then my dad was an electrical engineer, and then he started his own business maybe like 20, 25 years after working in engineering. He had a lighting company that sold light bulbs, ballasts, and fixtures to small business corporations. So I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I didn't know exactly what it was going to be. And then I knew eventually once I was in solar that it was going to be something in solar. I think what really like kind of helped me was when I was at Tesla slash Solar City. I worked for Lyndon Rive, who was the CEO of Solar City. He's actually Elon's cousin. And then like I realized like they were actually listening to a lot of what I was saying and implementing it when it came to environmental commodities. And I told myself like I really should like start a business on this. So essentially like basically I always planned to be an entrepreneur. I think once I was at Tesla, I was had the confidence and I basically talked to them about doing the same stuff that I was doing with environmental commodities, but instead as part of Renew Energy. And that actually, Tesla was my first client, which was great, to start a company and then have like a big client like Tesla, I was, at that point managing one of the largest environmental portfolios in the country. So I think that really helped, like obviously having two parents who are entrepreneurs, because it's definitely not easy to do. And then to understand the lifestyle that you would get into, and then the confidence to start it when I was at, Tesla, and then them being the first client that I had, which was, I'm always grateful, and I learned so much from working at Tesla too that I've incorporated in my own business.
Really interesting how you just grew up with it, and then as soon as solar clicked, you just knew that that was the path, and you were at a really good place to build that experience and then help you then set up from there. Okay, so let's dive into the today's topic, which is site selection and feasibility, and this is really where projects either get their wings or never get off the ground. So maybe let's think about the big picture. And so when you think about site selection and feasibility, what's your general approach?
I mean, our general approach is obviously finding relatively flat site without a lot of like trees that's close to three-phase power. We do a lot of community solar development. So we're trying to look for projects that are less than a mile from the interconnection point or three-phase power. We also look at too, like how many megawatts are available to tie into the grid. Those are like the main things. Obviously, this is even before we talk to the landowner, and then we're trying to figure out, how challenging maybe permitting might be in that township if there's sort of endangered species as well beforehand. So we're trying to due diligence the land site as much as possible. And then obviously, like we high level have created like a financial model to know like where to target. We create basically like a 20 to 25-year like discounted cash flow model, because we know that's what investors are looking for. And then we basically try to model it out like they would be doing. Like what are the, revenue assumptions, the EPC, the interconnection cost plays a huge part of it. I wish it was just like, hey, there's land. And it's funny because I feel like a lot of developers just find a great land site and then they don't do all this other work that's necessary to finalize whether it's a good site or not. So we're trying to do as much due diligence before we actually reach out to the landowner, because all that takes time and money too, so we want to make sure that it's a good site before we're actually contacting the landowner.
Yes, and I know that you've seen projects from so many different angles over the years, so this is really helpful. So let's dig a little bit deeper. What would you say would be the top things that you check for? You've mentioned them a little bit, but if you had to just enumerate, then like which ones would they be the ones that you normally go for when you're sizing up a site's potential?
As time goes on, it's harder to find good sites. It's more challenging, especially in sites like, for example, we developed a lot in New York State, and now New York is actually a very like saturated market. So it's actually harder to find good land sites because all the good ones are kind of taken. So you have to look at sites that maybe aren't as ideal as what we initially looked for. I think the other thing too I didn't mention previously was we prefer to go to sites or we prefer to go to markets where you could co-locate on the same site. So really what that means is like, for example, for community solar, the maximum system size usually is like 5 megawatts AC, but it really depends on the state. But most states in the US, that's the limitation on the size. But we'll try to find a site that where we could put maybe two or three, community solar it's not that easy to do. Obviously you have to do permitting and things like that. So I think like that's important. We try to find sites where there's minimal site work. So where I was talking about like, okay, if there's trees or if it's sloped, I mean, we prefer relatively, flat sites. Obviously, I go back to this like an endangered species is like a huge thing. So we find that that's like something we look at. And also, too, if the township's pro solar. So what we've seen in certain markets, like there'll be solar moratoriums that townships put because they've been inundated by so many solar developers for the land. So we try to find sites where there hasn't been a solar moratorium, because already the development timelines now take so much longer than they used to. And, time is money. So we're trying to be very efficient with doing as much due diligence at site selection so that we don't have come up with these issues later. And it can be very costly if you don't try to due diligence everything as early as possible. So it's challenging actually once we use all these requirements to find actually sites that we want to target, especially as markets get saturated.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that frames the issue in a really helpful way. And then sometimes a site looks great at first glance, but then it's really not the case. And you already mentioned like endangered species, but what would be some of the other red flags that might come up for you at a first look that might give you an idea that that site is not as strong as you think?
So, I mean, I think it's always ideal to once we find a site that we think is good, we'll reach out to the landowner first through like a mail campaign, then call the landowner. And then to walk the site, we learn a lot actually. I mean, obviously with technology now, it's, obviously PV is in the forefront of this, with, finding, substations and design but actually walking the site we learn so much, and then talking to the landowner too, we learn about the site, and maybe there are things that we weren't able to find with our own research, but when we talk directly to the landowner, they'll provide some information on the land specifically, and maybe there's some things that we didn't even think about once we
Mm-hmm.
walked the site, and really building the relationship with the landowner early on. And I think for us, we're educating the landowner, and then obviously we're trying to provide them a fair lease rate of what we think it's worth, which is different. Maybe other developers we find to be a lot more aggressive, where they're have like very high lease rates, and they haven't fully modeled out the project, where we want to really be transparent with the landowner as much as possible. So that's a big part of it, like walking the site, being there physically. We also like being if we're targeting a certain location, just being involved with the township, and then knowing and trying to build those relationships, because then we also learn too, what were challenges from other sites that might have been in that same area, or utility. And it's the same thing too. We're trying to build a relationship with the utility, because they sometimes will provide us, actually, we'll tell them about a site and they'll know information that's not publicly available as well, that could be challenging, related to interconnection, or how much sometimes an upgrade could be, so we know maybe it's not even worth our time. I think the just to summarize, going on the land site itself, building a relationship with the landowner, the township, and the utility. There's all this knowledge that is not publicly available, that they have, that could educate you on whether it's an ideal site. And we rather, obviously exit a site early than, go, because there's so much investment that, the developer has to do to get the project, in service. So we're trying to minimize our cost from the beginning, if that
And
makes
then I
sense.
guess when things, after you've done all this visits, when things don't check out, I assume the financial side usually makes it clear. So what would be,
For
for
sure.
example, one of financial deal breaker that has killed projects in your experience?
Obviously, the interconnection is the biggest cost. So sometimes when we've applied for a preliminary interconnection, then we get the final cost of what it would cost. That kills a lot of projects. I think sometimes it's challenging too with the townships. This is what I was getting to, is pilot taxes. That's basically property taxes for the solar project. And sometimes the townships don't have realistic expectations of what they should charge in taxes. And these are not real estate projects, which is a lot more lucrative. It's a solar project. Sometimes, I mean, they're obviously, they want tax revenue, but sometimes the projects can't support it. So I think that's another thing that we try to understand, find out what other solar projects in that township have paid, or what the assumption is on pilot taxes. And then we try to educate the township too if we think they're asking too much. But sometimes the township's not flexible. So that's another, thing that could kill the projects. Also too, there's obviously right now a lot of uncertainty with we don't know what the real EPC cost is, how much of the ITC. So also federal legislation's making it tariffs. now is a little bit challenging when we talk about like projects outside of 2026 because we're waiting for guidance for foreign entities of concern, which is related to China and the investment tax credit. So that all this uncertainty basically makes a challenge. I would say it's extremely challenging, at least right now, to develop solar projects, especially when you talk about earlier stage, just because there's so much uncertainty. But obviously, there's companies that are more equipped to handle like the uncertainty, if that makes sense, than others.
Yeah, that's really a very clear way to frame it. And then I was thinking also on the flip side, there's sometimes really challenging sites that can be turned around. So maybe do you have a particular story of a complex site that you were able to make work?
There's so many stories. I'm trying to figure out which one. I mean, I think the most complicated project is actually like the rooftop solar project that we're doing for the New York Housing Authority in Harlem. So we're doing it on 35 rooftops. That's going to be the first community solar project in Manhattan. I mean, I think like the challenging thing with that was like just like figuring out good rooftops that don't need much replacement and restoration. Also, you're talking about multiple small sites, and then to get like an investor interested in that, and then obviously you're going through a public entity to lease their roof, like to educate them and getting comfortable with it. A lot of it was education and just going on the sites multiple times and then looking at many different sites and then narrowing it because the New York Housing Authority is one of the largest real estate owners in New York City in the five boroughs. That's one that, comes to mind is like just the challenging to find a suitable rooftop where it makes like economic sense and then where there's not significant roof work or shading because in New York you have the issue of other large buildings or buildings coming in the future. So it's very different from like a land site. I would say like on the land side, we really try to keep it to simple sites. We have looked at like brownfields and landfills, but that's been pretty challenging. We've been focused on more of there's no simple development, but like clean land sites. But always there'll be something that comes up that we haven't thought about until we go through the process. We work with our lawyers to figure out ways to get around it.
Those are some really good examples, and it actually brings me to the our next section. You're talking about all of these challenges, finding right roofs or right land, and finding the least amount of work. From all of your experience throughout these years, what are some innovations or tools that you've seen recently that make site selection and feasibility decisions a little bit smarter or faster?
Software and AI and automation is a huge thing. I know PV obviously integrates these things to make site selection a lot easier and find good sites. The challenging thing is other developers are able to use those tools as well. So it makes it more competitive. But I think like AI and automation, and it's amazing like how much software is now out there to basically use, and then design too is like getting automated. I mean, we contract all our engineering out, so we don't have like engineer in-house, but to see like how like now designs and have become like automated or AI generated is pretty amazing to see. So like I think it's a lot easier to like just even contacting the landowner, like land campaigns and sending things out and like the GIS technology and the enablement and then being responsive, very quickly and automating like the proposal process or, agreements and things like that. It's just, I mean, for a small company, I think we lean probably more on software and innovations maybe than some other developers out there for sure.
So it sounds like you're very familiar with the new trends and the new softwares out there. But of course, every trend ends up living up to a hype. So are there any trends that maybe are a little too overhyped right now that you can think of?
I think at the end of the day, like you can have all this technology, but if you can't build relationships with obviously the landowner, the financiers, the township, the utility, it doesn't you'll see it's a lot harder to develop and obviously to create projects. So obviously it's great to have these tools and everything, and it makes you smarter, but there's still like the human aspect of it that's so important. And, a lot of business is about relationships, and I don't think like that could be replaced. And that's a competitive, obviously, advantage. So I think it's still like the old fashioned way of doing things, and then just, obviously using these tools to, be more efficient and obviously qualify leads and things like faster and stuff. Doing business with people that they know, like, and trust.
Exactly. I think we can move to doing things smarter and faster, but that human connection we really can't get rid of, because in the end is how you build trust with your community, your customers and everyone around you. On the flip side, would you say that there's any trend or anything that maybe we're not paying enough attention to that you think, I guess, your competitors should know about?
I mean, we don't believe we have competitors. It's really like us adding value to our clients, and the better that we get, the better we're able to serve and add value to the clients. And in the solar industry, it's still early, and there's so much opportunity in so many different ways. I would say like this is a trend that everyone's obviously talking about, is like adding solar and storage to projects, which everyone's looking at, or storage only. I think it's a lot more complicated too, like to add storage. And then also it's complicated too for the financing community to basically invest in these projects. So I mean that's a differentiator that we have. Like my background is in finance, so a lot of developers know how to find a good site and they don't know how to do other stuff, which I think like, obviously us having like a diverse team, and then as well as me, I've worked in different parts of the solar and energy industry, so I'm able to bring a unique perspective. I mean, we first actually, which is interesting, like we were doing renewable energy credits, then we are helping developers with finding financing for projects. And then developers were asking us, like, hey, can you help out with this, this, and this? So we started providing development as a service. And then we started developing our own projects. So like, we've worked with a lot of developers and we see obviously what works and what doesn't work. So I think it's, everyone's obviously looking at storage only, solar plus storage, especially with the big beautiful bill is basically extending the investment tax credit for standalone storage in the US till I think it's 2033 at the full 30%. So we think there's going to be a great opportunity for sure.
So with all of this competition and, as the competition for land heats up, what would you say is your strategy for finding viable sites and as things get a little bit tighter and more competitive?
So it's basically going to places that there's now not a lot of competition. So looking at states and geographies that are not as competitive, or like have, so this is the other thing that makes development challenging, as I kind of alluded to it before. Development is local. The people developing the most projects, really from the development standpoint, are the people who are in those markets. So we're going to continue to focus on New Jersey and New York, even though they're saturated compared to other markets. We are looking at other markets as well, but I would say too, like we're also partnering with developers that we know who are maybe in those markets, or someone local to that area, is kind of how we're going to differentiate ourselves. So like less, so it's staying on our existing markets because there's still opportunities. The other thing too, I mentioned solar plus storage, but also we're seeing a lot of repowering of assets, people reaching out to, do that. If your audience is not familiar with repowering, it's basically taking older solar, plants and then replacing them with newer, like, you know, obviously modules, but also potentially storage. And it's a lot easier to get approved because it's already been approved for interconnection and other things. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of what we're focused on. I guess staying local to our existing markets and then going to markets that are less competitive, but having a local partner because, it's challenging to build that trust in markets if you're not there.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And then I'm sure we have a lot of listeners who are starting out in this space. What would be the one piece of advice that you would give someone who's assessing their very first site?
I think the first thing to do is first get into like a letter of intent. Look high level on Google Earth, see if it looks like a good site. We focus on community solar, like ideally like a half a mile or less from the three-phase power. Try to figure out whether there's, an opportunity to interconnect. And then obviously the landowner piece is like, find the contact information of the landowner, figure out what the market is for that piece of land. Usually, most developers are going into lease agreements, they're not purchasing the land. So like obviously coming up with the market value, what you think is viable, and then model out the project to see if it's viable. I mean, that's the challenging thing. Like developers are not modeling projects in the beginning to see, if it works. And that's kind of a waste of time.
That's a really good, valuable guidance. So let me close with this. And you may have already touched on some of these items, but what's the North Star for you? So let's talk about the guiding principle that you always come back to when you're looking at a potential solar opportunity.
I mean, it's really about long-term value and trust, right? So we're so transparent. Like we'll tell people the site sucks to the landowner. Like it doesn't make sense to do solar, or it's better for you to wait, or like we're gonna be very transparent with what we think. I mean, I was just with a rooftop owner who wanted to do community solar in New Jersey because they expanded that program, and I'm like, it's gonna take some time, and then we don't know like what. I think it's always being transparent. Like people appreciate. I don't. It's might be because most other companies are not as transparent. Like I'm trying to explain to the rooftop owner, like we don't know what the return is going to be for this project for you, like as a lease payment for your roof. Because everything's really up in there. We don't know how to price with the big, beautiful bill, like, especially on these front of the meter projects, they take a lot more time to develop. So you're really going into 2026. So I told them, look, this is what we know right now, but it's probably all going to change. We just very clear with expectations, just being honest and transparent through the whole process. We probably lose more business because of that, but then people do trust us and then they refer us to stuff.
So, based on everything we discussed today, what would you say are the main takeaways for our listeners when it comes to the future of site selection and feasibility?
I know I'm saying it's saturated or competitive now, but it really actually isn't. I'm comparing it from 5 years ago. But think about how many rooftops, right, in the US don't have solar on it. Even commercial rooftops and even land. Like when on planes all the time flying over the US, and I'm still surprised like how much solar there is not. So like this is very early in the process of site selection. Obviously, it's like using tools, like PV Case has amazing, tools to help find ideal sites. So I think like the, I think the solar transition is still very early. And I think I've just been in it for like now 15 years or more than 15 years that it's still early. Like 50% of all new generation last year was solar in the US. And that's going to continue to increase. And I think solar only makes 5 to 6% of total generation in the US. I would say in 10 to 15 years, maybe 20 years, probably be 50 or 60%. So like there's such a massive opportunity with site selection and finding good sites. The more challenging sites are going to work because we're going to see power prices increase substantially. So I'll even tell this to landowners like the economics don't work right now, but give it 2 or 3 years and they'll make sense because like electricity prices are going to increase dramatically. Solar is going to continue to go down in pricing because it's a technology, not a fuel. Swanson's law is basically similar to chip computing with Moore's law, that basically if you double the production of solar, panels, the module will go down like 50%. We'll continue to see that. I have to remember that it's still very early and the opportunity is going to be a lot bigger and a lot more exponential than the past 5 to 10 years.
It's really, really great hearing you speak with so much optimism and so much excitement. But I'm sure we have some people in the audience who are a little bit more concerned right now with the One Beautiful Bill and how this will be affecting, solar moving forward, the solar coaster, as it's being called. What are your thoughts? Because I see you're really optimistic, but anything that you can share with us.
Obviously, it's very challenging. A lot has happened in a very short period of time. July 4th was the signing of the Big Beautiful Bill. I think it's going to be extremely challenging the next year and a half for a lot of companies, especially in construction and development of solar projects. We're basically telling the landowners and building owners, we're going to have to wait. Like, we're not going to do anything because we don't really know Like waiting. We just got the safe harboring guidance, and this is for 2026. And I've heard like there's a lot of discussion within the government. So I don't even know when they're going to figure this out. But I would say it's definitely going to be a very challenging time for sure. A lot of companies are going to go bankrupt. We're already seeing large companies going bankrupt. One thing is the solar industry is pretty dynamic, resilient, and pretty creative. So it's amazing. We'll see a lot of innovation. Obviously, it's going to be a challenging time for everyone, but I think, like I've now been on the solar coaster with my own company for 13 years. So I'm pretty confident, like whatever, the government does, like we'll figure out a way to kind of come up with the industry will come up with the way with an innovative solution if electricity prices keep going up like this. So like people are like, hey, this makes our life easier because it's so complicated. It's only solar panels, modules, and racking, but because of federal incentives, permitting, because the local utilities, everyone's making it so complicated. That's why I laugh. I'm like, this is pretty simple. Like what obviously there are big companies that have made a lot of money doing business a certain way. They're going to make it more challenging. Obviously, the oil and gas industry has supposedly given $1 billion to the current administration. So in lobbying dollars, so obviously, they have to do what's beneficial for them. And unfortunately, the customer is going to pay with higher electricity prices. But that also does help, obviously, the solar industry because what I keep reiterating, it's the cheapest form of electricity and the fastest to go online because that everything else just confuses the customer. That's all I tell customers because people are telling them a million different things. So they don't know what's like right. And there's also a lot of fake news, even through that people are saying that are confusing landowner, business owner, utilities. So it's, the main thing is that solar is the cheapest form of electricity and the fastest to come online. So that's all I
Go
tell them.
back and wrap up with always the educational part and the transparency. So I think that's definitely the key takeaway. But Benoy, thank you so much for joining us today and walking us through the realities of site selection and feasibility. It's really been a really practical and eye-opening conversation. And for anyone who wants to keep up with the Benoy's work, definitely check out Reneu Energy and connect with him on LinkedIn. And to our listeners, I hope you're walking away with some real-world takeaways you can apply in your own projects. Thank you, Benoy. Thank you for listening. What Matters is powered by PVKs, the platform trusted by solar professionals around the globe. If you never want to miss out on insights that keep solar projects moving forward, make sure you follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're interested in learning more about streamlining your solar project needs, visit pvks.com for more info. Until next time.